All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to our conversation that we're having today. This is part of our Managing Innovation class with Dr. Jeremy Chambers, and this is part of our innovation plan. I'm here with Nathaniel Smith and Zach Talbot, who are going to introduce themselves. They're part of our class, and we're interviewing Pastor Ken Wetmore, who is going to be not the host, but he's going to be the person we're interviewing today as part of the class. So Zach, you want to give a short introduction of who you are, Nathaniel, and then we'll come to you, Ken.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for watching out there. My name's Zach, and I'm a pastor in the Seattle area, and have been doing ministry here for about 6 years. Before that, I was a public school teacher, taught history in California, and I've been married for 7 years today. So happy anniversary to me, and I get to hang out with Ken. I'm super excited about that. And we've got 2 little boys, Caspian, he's almost 3, Griffin's 11 months. But yeah, this podcast is really important. We've seen people struggling with succession in churches ourselves. So we all have anecdotal stories about this, but even the research tends to point towards there being a struggle that churches are not prepared often for succession. So we're really interested to hear things that are going well and things that can be improved. So thanks so much, Ken, for being here.
Awesome. Thanks, Zach. Yeah, Nathaniel.
Hey, how's it going? Nathaniel, I'm pastor out in Boise, Idaho, one of the fastest growing areas in the U.S. I have a curse that tends to happen to me wherever I move. And I have been in ministry for a while now, just ended up resigning from a previous pastorate and took over in a new church plant, just a micro church network. And we're kicking things off here in Boise, and also have a location out in Arkansas. And then so we're hoping to build that network up, and no telling what the future holds there, but real excited about the possibilities in that. So yeah, and looking forward to talking with you here, Ken. We've had a great conversation with the pastor that was at your church before you, and he had great things to say. So now you have a lot to
live up to
live up to, because you kind of set the bar real high about you. So
I hope you're not too disappointed. Andy's an incredible human being. So I'll just we'll just settle for second. I'm okay with that.
Ken, I'll let you know that I was sick during Andy's interview, so I didn't get to make that one. I was battling some kind of weird flu thing, and so there's nowhere to go but up for me.
Sweet. That worked out really good for me then. So
yeah.
You know, you were sick, and now it's your anniversary, Zach. You've got a lot going on in your life, man.
Hey, I'm just going to say that you will be the best person I've interviewed for this podcast. There's no
That's
guarantee.
right.
So far.
So, hey, first in your book and second in everybody else. That's okay. 1 out of 3 is all right. I can live with that.
Yeah. Hey, and
it wasn't that he, well, not to say that he was a great guy, but he spoke highly of you. He said that you would be just phenomenal. So
yeah.
I think we have. I will say, I think, and you'll hear this, I think, during the podcast a little bit more, but I think we have a lot of mutual respect for each other. There's Andy did a lot of things really well. And one of the things that I appreciate the most is he set me up for success.
Wow. That's what it's about.
And that's not always the case, as I'm sure you all are aware and have seen. But Andy really, I think, put the church first, and made sure that that the person who came after him had every opportunity to succeed, and I'm incredibly grateful to him for that.
Listen, before we get to that, I'm excited to hear it. Why don't I'll give 30 seconds, and then we'll start from the top to get some background about you, Ken. So I'm Andreas Beck. I'm the third person in this team. I'm currently pastoring in Walla Walla, Washington. I've been here for 3 years, and I'm at a university church. So we have Walla Walla University literally across the road. We're on the same campus. And I've had my own experience in the last 3 years of moving into a congregation where the previous pastor had been there for about 12 years. and had my own succession story. So I'm interested to hear how it went well for you, Ken, and the lessons you learned through it. So Ken, why don't you give us some background about who you are and what brought you into ministry, and then we'll start to talk a little bit about how you transitioned into your current location.
Sure. Well, I'll try to keep it brief, because if I told you the story, it would take most of your podcast, and I know that's not what we're talking about. I actually, I actually have an undergraduate degree in public relations, a master's degree in organizational leadership, and a very strong undergraduate minor in religion. So that's, I come within the Seventh-day Adventist denomination, I come from a very untraditional way of coming into ministry. Traditionally, Seventh-day Adventists are there's kind of a path. You do theology in college, then you do a 1 or 2 year internship out of college, and then you go to seminary for 3 years, 3-ish years. And then you wind up being put back into maybe a small district, and you kind of work your way that way. I worked in broadcast news and in communications before being asked to be a pastor in a district not too far from where Andreas is right now. They'd gone through over 70 names, and I was the only person stupid enough to say, okay, I'll do that. And that's how I became a pastor. Just found my calling and know that's what I'm meant to do. I love doing news, but the good news is way better. And you don't feel dirty at the end of the day. You feel like you've actually made the world a better place, instead of just kind of, and I have all this respect in the world for the news media. I know a lot of people don't. I do. I know how hard they work. I know most of them really do try to get it right, but still it leaves you feeling pretty, you deal with the worst of life instead of looking for the best. So actually from I started off pastoring out in Washington State. I moved to Tennessee, Nashville. I lived there for 9 years. Worked in kind of an organizational role, working with youth, with probably about 70, 80 churches in Kentucky and Tennessee. And then was asked to take on the largest church in that region, that particular territory of all of Kentucky, and then Western Tennessee. It was about a 1,600 member church. And then it was from that church that I came to be at WholeLife Church, where I've been currently for about a year. So that's my story.
And remind us, where is WholeLife Church located?
Yeah, Orlando, Florida. We're in Orlando, Florida.
Wonderful.
And there's about on the books, there's about 1,200 members. Between two church services right now, we're probably averaging right around 500, 550 attending on any given Saturday morning between two services. So we have, I'd say we easily have 900 to 1,000 people that filter through in a 1 month period. But on any given Saturday, you're going to see between 500 and 600 people there.
Okay. Now, Nate had mentioned that we spoke with Andy McDonald, who was the previous pastor at WholeLife Church. And Andy had been there for how long, Ken?
37 years.
Okay.
Which is that's a long time for anybody, but within the Seventh-day Adventist denomination, that's absolutely unheard of. Like a long tenure within the Seventh-day Adventist Church is 15 years. That would be like really long. Most people are averaging somewhere between 5 and 10 years at this point. So for Andy to be at WholeLife for 37 years, like I said, I think there's only 1 or 2 other pastors in the denomination that have done that.
And you'd mentioned at the beginning that he did a really good job setting you up. Are you aware of what the strategic plan was that WholeLife had when they were trying to figure out how we're going to transition from someone who was there basically as long as I've lived? I think Andy was there from 85. I was born in 84. Almost as long as I've lived, he was the pastor of that congregation. Wow. Do you know if they had a strategic plan in how they were going to transition and have a good succession plan for the next pastor?
Yeah, I'll talk about that. But I just want to say, I hope that you said that to Andy too. I hope you pointed out to him that you were born at the same. So, okay. Anyway, but no. So what they had a plan, but the plan didn't go the way that they had thought it was going to go. Andy had planned on retiring a little bit more slowly. Part of their succession plan was to bring somebody in, let them kind of walk side by side with Andy for maybe a year to 2 years, and kind of transition in that way. But within the Seventh-day Adventist Church, that's just not the way that things normally happen. And gravity does what gravity does. And there were some other little things that kind of happened in this transition period that caused it to be so that that part didn't happen. But they had already set up a plan for finding a new senior pastor, which they were in the midst of doing when they discovered that Andy wasn't going to be able to continue on side by side with the new senior pastor for a year and a half. And so they were able, I think, to kind of speed the process up, but at the same time do a really, instead of being panicked, they had a plan. And I think that really made a huge difference in the transition.
That's great. So they had this intention of you two being able to work side by side for a while, and that didn't happen. Was there anything that took place to kind of help bridge that gap? Any ongoing conversations between you and Andy, or anything that tried to help bridge that gap, since that wasn't a possibility?
Yeah, as soon as I was named, Andy and I were in touch with each other, and we've stayed in touch with each other. Andy lives here in the area, so it's not hard for me to reach out to him. It's not hard, obviously, digitally, but I can go out for a meal with him. We can chat. And so I would say it's a little less, it's probably more informal than a formal plan. And one of the things I did actually appreciate was that Andy has allowed it to be at my desire. In other words, he doesn't insert himself. If I have a question, I know what his phone number is, which is what he basically told me. You know where I live, you know my phone number, I'm available to you whenever. But you need to make the call, not vice versa. And so I've appreciated that a lot, because it's I really did wonder coming in after Andy being there for 37 years, whether he was going to be able to keep his fingers out of the, out of things, because, there was his staff. It's his church. I mean, it's his baby. He's nurtured and loved that child for 37 years. And I can appreciate when a new person comes in, how hard it could be if they make changes that you don't agree with, or that you're concerned about, to go ahead and keep your mouth shut, and not talk to the people that have influence in the church and be like, hey, rein Ken in, or even just pick up the phone. Best case scenario, pick up the phone and go, hey, Ken, you're really messing up. Don't do that. So I've appreciated Andy. He really, in the year that I've been here, I don't think he has, I don't think he's really contacted me for anything that he was concerned about. But he's also, when I've called him and asked questions, he's always been available and willing.
Now, Ken, we've spoken about, oh, sorry, Nate, go on.
Oh, no, I was just saying that just shows great maturity on his part.
Definitely.
And being willing to let go and really trust that you're the man for the job, and let you take over.
And like I said, I respect it so much, because I don't blame, I have 2 children that I'm raising. Right now I have a daughter who's 18 and a son who's 16. And, I can appreciate, it's very hard not to get involved when you see your child, when you see things not going right the way they ought to, or you want to do with things that you love and you care. And so for him, like I said, I think, Nate, you said it really well, just a ton of maturity, and I think also an understanding of organizational leadership too, because I think you really have to also understand the damage you can do by stepping in when you shouldn't. And I think, like I said, I think that's a really good thing that you said, Nate. A lot of maturity on his part, and a good leader. Yeah.
Zach, you look like you have a question, but let me jump in before you ask yours. You've spoken a lot about Andy, and within the Seventh-day Adventist, tradition, we don't tend to have founding pastors, really. I mean, you may have a pastor who plants a church and then they move on, but you're right. Andy is a unicorn in the sense that he was in a place for almost 40 years. But beyond Andy, was the governing board involved in the strategic plan? Where did they come in deciding what was going to happen? Did Andy just come to them and say, okay, this is what we're going to do, and they said, yes, sir? Or did he involve the governing board in some way? Were they the ones who were doing the search process, or were there some other people involved in this succession plan?
I don't know. That would be definitely the question for Andy, which way it went. I do know that WholeLife, like most Seventh-day Adventist church, is a staff-driven church versus a membership or even board-driven church. Mm-hmm. The operating board is very high level, and obviously succession would be a high level plan, but I know that they were involved with it. I know that they put together a team of people to help with that. But the details of it and how involved, and whether it was Andy that came to them or that they came up with it, I don't know the answer to that.
Sure. And were you contacted by the governing board when it came to being recruited or being interviewed, or was that done by another organization?
Yeah, it was done by a search, a headhunting company that they actually were approaching a number of different Seventh-day Adventist leaders around the United States for names, and one of those leaders submitted my name, and they contacted me and asked if their name is Faith Search Partners, so just to make it easier. So Faith Search contacted me and asked if I was interested at all, and if it hadn't been the leader that. If I hadn't known the leader that submitted my name and known who they were, I probably would have told them no. But because of who it was, I was like, well, if they're putting my name in, I probably ought to go ahead and respect that and leave my name in if that's what they think.
Yeah, thanks. We know.
Can you?
Oh, I'm sorry, Zach. Go for it. Go
for
it.
Yeah. No, I. It's really interesting to me to hear, the board is pretty high level. They're a little bit more hands off. There's more staff driven. I wonder if you'd share just some of the things that went well for you as you went in, particularly as it relates to the staff. So as you came in, knowing that it's staff driven is for most of how your church operates. And you definitely don't need to be negative towards any staff members or anything, but I'd love for you to share, what were the positives or what were the things that you benefited from jumping in, and then maybe even from the congregation as well. What was a successful part of that process for you?
Well, I think that one of the things I really appreciated was that I don't know exactly how Andy worded it to the staff, but it was pretty clear to me that when I came on, Andy had told them that I was the boss and they weren't to be second guessing me. I was really shocked because I kind of came in with the plan of not changing anything for at least 6 months to a year. Just sit back, take in the landscape, figure out who the power players were, figure out who on the staff was going to be in my corner, who in the staff was concerned about me, just kind of figure things out. And we had one of the things that I feel like went really right was that, and this is, I don't know, I'm going to do the long answer to your question. So basically what happened was the last two transitions that I've had before this one, I actually worked 2 jobs at the same time. So when I moved from Spokane, Washington to Nashville, I was doing that job for about 3 months at the same time as pastoring the church in Spokane. And then when I went from running, the part of the job in Nashville that I went to was running a summer camp over the summers, which sounds like fun, but it is more work than most people have any idea. And so I did that. Plus I worked with churches, with youth programs, like I said, in Kentucky and Western Tennessee. And so when I was asked to go pastor the Madison campus church, this large church in Nashville, I actually did that and ran the summer camp and did the youth responsibilities for 7 months while I was transitioning into this large church where I was a senior pastor. And it was brutal. It was one of my big takeaways was with all due respect to my leadership there, I was not set up for success. It was when you're trying to do two big jobs at the same time, you just can't do them both well. And I stayed at Madison campus for 5 years, and things went well enough. It was, but there was a huge learning curve for me. It was obviously a much larger church than I'd ever pastored before. And so one of the things I decided when I transitioned to WholeLife was within the Seventh-day Adventist Church, they encourage you to hurry. And most churches are ready, right? They're ready to get the new pastor in. They're ready to move along. And I think that we probably could have managed things where I could have been preaching 2 weeks after Andy's last sermon. But I asked them not to make me do that. And I had accrued about 6 weeks of unspent vacation, which I'm not proud of, but it is what it is. And in the Adventist church, you can either cash that out or you can request to remain on payroll the 6 weeks. The conferences in our denomination prefer you to cash it out so they don't have to worry about your insurance and stuff like that over the 6 weeks. The conference that I was coming from, the Kentucky Tennessee conference, was nice enough to allow me to actually use the 6 weeks as vacation time. So I did that. And then I also requested that the Florida conference give me an additional 3 weeks of transition time as well. So by the time it was done, I think I had about 8 or 9 weeks of time to rest. And that's, so I moved my whole house down here. I got it all set up. I never had that luxury before. It always been working and moving, and it was, and you guys, you know how brutal that can be. And so it was just a nice, I took time to reflect. I wrote out the lessons that I'd learned over the last 10 years. And specifically the last 5 years, the things I did not want to do the same, the things that I wanted to replicate. I really took some time to reflect on where I'd been and where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do and how I wanted to be a pastor at WholeLife. And so that was one of probably the best things. And WholeLife was gracious enough to let me do it. I don't think they were thrilled about it because they're like, come on, let's just get going. But what happened was I eased my feet into the pool. So I moved in April, took all of April to get moved. And then in May, I started, even though I had a couple more weeks, I started just individually meeting with each one of the staff members. I took each one out to eat at their favorite restaurant. I just told them, hey, I want to figure out, I love eating out. So I'd like you to show me the best places to eat in Orlando. And so the church paid for that. They paid for me to take each staff member out to their favorite place to eat. And just, I had no agenda other than to get to know them. Tell me what you need. Tell me what you like. Tell me what you don't like. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about your family. And that was a huge positive for us in that transition. Because at that point, I was not worried about writing sermons. I wasn't worried about governing. I was just getting to know people. And I was able to really just put my focus on knowing people. And I did the same thing with some of the key leaders in the church, the board members. Some of those folks would go out with them, get to know them. And it was a huge benefit to me to be able to do that. And so through those discussions with those staff members, I was able to figure out what I wanted to do for my first sermon series, which it kind of, which I think was another huge thing is that picking that right sermon series to come in on.
Right.
I discovered that the values of the church, a lot of churches have mission statements and vision statements, but WholeLife has those, but they also have a set of values that they really care about. And so I did a sermon series on each one of their values: love, acceptance, forgiveness, grace, the Bible, participation, and service. And so I took each one of those elements and I called the series "This Is Us." And I started off with a very personal story about my family and our family values and why values matter, and then just talked about it. And so what I felt like really helped with that was that it connected me to that church immediately. They go, oh, he gets us. He gets the values. At the same time, it's a really good refresher for the church about what their values were, because we're coming out of COVID. I say out of COVID, but what is that? But we're back in church anyway.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of a good refresher for the new people, and even the old people. It was people who'd been there a while. It was like, oh yeah. And it also put a definition where we could define what those values mean. Because when I say that I love you, what does that mean? I love pizza. I love my dog. I love my wife. I love my kids. Hopefully I love each one of those things in a different way. And so we defined out what those values meant to me, and we could have a discussion about it as we went along. And that was really, really helpful. And
Ken,
so anyway,
let me just interrupt. One of the things I'm hearing from you, which I haven't actually thought about, but reflecting on my own transition to Walla Walla, is this idea of making sure the incoming pastor is giving a really good period of time to rest. I hadn't thought of that. And I think that is important, because if you come in and you're frazzled and harried, you're not going to start well. And we know how crucial starting well is when you go to a new congregation. So I really appreciate that, because I essentially did what you did in your previous one, not in your move to Florida, but when I was coming to Walla Walla, I was in Seattle. I said yes to the role in December, and I didn't move until March. But during that time, I was working essentially for both churches, because I was finishing up my role in Seattle, and then they had me coming out to Walla Walla to preach. And so I came and preached 2, maybe 4 times before I moved. So when I moved in again, people were wanting to meet with me, get us going, and I probably had 2 weeks. And that 2 weeks was spent doing what? Unpacking boxes. And then I was into my role. So I think the fact you were able to have such a long period of uninterrupted time to meet with each of the pastoral staff, to be able to take a close look at the values and the mission and vision statement of the church, must have just, that sounds like a really important part of what so far seems to have been a successful transition. So thank you for sharing that. Any questions? Nate, I see you've got a question coming up.
No, yeah, and I wanted to piggyback on that and say that that's awesome. I think one of the things you mentioned, Andreas, is that time of rest. And what really stood out to me was there was a period there, and I want to make sure I'm getting this right, Ken. It was during that period where you had that about 8 weeks off. That's when you were meeting with staff members and key leaders. Is that correct?
The last 3 weeks of that, yes.
Yeah. So, I feel like it's amazing that you had that time to really gain a grasp of your context is really the best way of putting it. And that's something that in our research, I noticed was a huge transition piece for people coming into executive roles. There was a struggle. The biggest struggle they had was getting an understanding of their context, hitting the ground running, and all the while trying to figure out what is what, what really matters, who does what, who's on your side, where do you fit in? And the fact that you were able to do that you had this time carved out to meet with people and gain a grasp of your context before launching your first sermon series. That's something I feel like that should be a go-to lesson for anyone in transition. That should be built in. And it's something that boards or hiring parties, whoever's the hiring authority, should take that into consideration, that this will set your incoming pastor up for success if you give them that time.
I couldn't agree with you more.
One of the things that we also realized as we were doing some research, Ken, was that transitions are critical moments. And I mean, this is a sort of thing. You don't necessarily need research, but research has borne out that transitions are an opportunities for organizations to really sharp their strategy for future growth and to reiterate what their values are. So again, it was so interesting for me to hear that you use that opportunity to sharpen your strategy and to reiterate what your church was about. I think part of Zach's question to you, and I want to come back to it, was, are there things within your transition that you wish could have gone a little better? You know, how would you have improved on it, even though it sounds like you had some really excellent things happen?
Yeah, Zach, sorry about that. I ran all the way around your question, never answered it. So
no, it was great. Yeah.
No. So yeah, there were a few things that I would I think, because one of the things that I think would have been better was that I had a couple staff members that were ready to make their own transitions out. And at least one of them, our governing body is called a conference. And so the conference is the one that does all the hiring and firing technically. And so I had one staff member who had approached them back when Andy was still the senior pastor, and they knew the transition was coming, and they said, oh, just hang on. You might like the new guy. You might want to be there. But what they kind of failed to realize was it wasn't an Andy or a Ken issue. It was a organizational fit issue. This person did not align. As my carpentry friend said, this person was a bubble off plum. She just didn't quite fit. It was close, but it was off, and it was not. It's easy to blame the leader, but it wasn't. It was that she didn't. The vision, the mission, and the values are all good, and it wasn't that she's a bad person for not resonating with, but she just didn't resonate with what Whole Life Church was about. And it just never fit just right for her. And so they begged her to stay on and just see. And so what that turned out to be was a big, that was probably the biggest hurdle that I've encountered, because it led to a number of issues that we're still actually trying to resolve. And because eventually she did transition out, and I'm glad, not because she's a hard worker, she's a great person. I'd recommend her. It just was that she just didn't fit the Whole Life Church, and particularly the position that she was in. But in general, the Whole Life Church, her philosophy was just different. And so she eventually transitioned out, but it created a lot more chaos than it had to. One of the great things is that we had a youth pastor position that was open, that they purposely didn't fill, and they allowed me to fill it when I came in. And that was fantastic. I have a phenomenal youth pastor right now. I would not trade her for anything. She is amazing. But I got to fill that position. I got to make that choice, and I got to make sure that the person was in alignment with what I was looking for. I had another person that was ready to transition out too, who had just had a child. She was ready to kind of stay at home with her child. That's what she wanted to do. So she transitioned out just as I was coming in, before I actually hit the ground, but after Andy had left. And again, it seemed like a bad thing, but it was actually a good thing, because I got to fill that position. I got to find a person that I knew would fit the organization and also fit my management style and who I want to have rounding out my team. And so I'm super happy with those two picks. if they would have let the other person do that, I'd be 6 months ahead of where I'm at right now with that particular position. But as far as bad things happening, if that's the worst thing that happened, I feel pretty blessed, because it's not even the worst thing on earth. It's just, if I were to say one thing, I think that allowing people to transition out with the old pastor, if they're ready to, I think that the church should allow it. I think that I'm really grateful that I have a number of senior leaders that didn't leave, that are on board. They're helping me with that transition. But all of them were on board with me being there. All of them were on board with what the church's mission and vision and values are. All of those senior leaders get it. And so it's a pleasure working with them. And they are fantastic. And I am happy that they're on, and they're providing continuity and helping me figure out the culture as I'm making it. But that's one of the big things that I would say, that if I were to do anything different or advise somebody to do something different, if somebody's ready to transition out, let them do it.
That's good. That's real big. You mentioned, and I'm sorry, I hope I'm not, Zach, I hope I'm not cutting you off around Jay's. But you mentioned that the church was willing to pay for those meals that you had. You also mentioned that there was a consultant, a third party that helped with hiring. From your perspective, what were some other things that the church budgeted for to help with the transition? What type of budgeting did the church use for this transition?
So when we're talking church, I have to go ahead and just kind of get into the weeds a little bit so you have the local church, and then you have the governing body, the conference. So the local church covered the meals that we talked about. They actually are the ones that paid for the consultant. And within the Seventh-day Adventist Church, again, that's unheard of, because the governing body is the one, they have full-time staff that replace people in positions within churches within their area. And so to bring in a consultant, I have to take my hat off. I know that the person is called a ministerial director or a vice president for ministerial. That person actually caught some heat for allowing a consultant to come in. And they were given a hard time that, oh, don't you know how to do your job? Don't you know how to fill a large church? I mean, and with all due respect, that consultant firm was everything in this process. Like I didn't think I would never have thought I was the right fit for WholeLife Church if you'd asked me. And I don't think a ministerial director would have thought I was the right, but because of their expertise in hiring, they went through, they figured it out, and they figured out that I was a good match for that church. And all I can say is, for me, it's just been hand in glove. I have never walked into a church like this and just felt at home immediately. I mean, it was, and I think that the same thing, they would say the same thing, that I've heard that over and over. It's like, it's just like you have been here all along. It's like and that's what I think really was the benefit of a full-time organization that hires people, is they're able to really profile and figure out what the congregation is. And so anyway, back to the budgeting part of it. That was budgeted.
Wait. Before you go to the budgeting, I hold your thought, Ken. Do you think that the consulting group is also part of the reason that they went from someone who was in his late 60s to someone who was 30 years younger or 20 years younger? Do you think the consulting group pushed the age of the next person to replace Andy lower than if it had been just the governing organization? Or do you think they'd have gone as young as the consulting group went as well?
Honestly, I think so. I'll be super biased here and say I think that I'm 47 years old. I think I'm the perfect age for this particular church. I think there's another church that's actually much larger than Seventh-day Adventist church is much larger than my church, about 20 minutes away, and they were filling their position at the same time as well. And they went with somebody who's actually 37. So the conference, and the conference was very involved with that one. So would they have picked somebody younger? I think they would have. But I do think that there's also a sweet spot in ministry. I think that I think I'm a much different pastor, a much better pastor for WholeLife than I was for Madison campus coming in. I just think I've gained some life experience that I learned some things at Madison campus that have been incredibly helpful to me at WholeLife Church.
Sure.
And so for me, I think I'm in a good spot. I think I've got 13 to 15 years of high quality, and I'd like to say 20. I hope it's 20. I think I've got 15, to 20 years of really high quality pastoral ministry in front of me. With that said, I think I'm also in a really good spot. I think that you usually identify with people who are about 10 years younger to 10 years older than you to really be able to connect. It's not that you can't connect and you can't connect. It's not like I can't connect with 27-year-olds, but I think that you really tend to connect with those people that are in that 10-year plus or minus with you.
Sure.
And so anyway, so I feel like I'm in a pretty sweet spot for me. And I think that the consulting group, I do think that they had a lot to do with kind of figuring out what that sweet spot was and making sure that they brought people to the church that were within a certain experience and age range.
Awesome. And I took you away from talking about budgeting.
Yeah, so the local church budgeted for the meals and for the consulting group, because the conference isn't going to pay for something that they do themselves, and so the church paid for that. Now the conference paid to have me moved. They gave me the it's a cost thing when you don't have a person in the pulpit preaching. They paid for 3 weeks of me not preaching, right? And so they did that. They took care of all the moving costs for me to get down here and to make that transition. One of the cool things that the conference did is that when on the Saturday that I was officially introduced to the church, and I always hate the word installation. It sounds like you're like a chandelier or something. But anyway, but on that particular Saturday, they showed up. They gave gifts to my wife, to my kids. It was the first time I've ever gone to a church where my kids were remembered. And I think they gave my kids each like a $50 gift certificate or Amazon card or something like that. And it meant the world to my kids. My kids were like, whoa, that's like, that was a big deal to them. And so those are some things that I think were paid for. And I think it's one of the things that sometimes churches nickel and dime themselves out of really making them. We don't invest where we should. I mean, if you think about it, how expensive is a $50 gift card for 2 kids? I mean, $100. And my kids have been in boarding school. My son came back, and he's going to be going and working at a summer camp this summer. And his big fear was that he wasn't going to have a Saturday that he was going to be able to go to WholeLife and be at the church. Because he loves that church and he knows they love him and he feels cared about. And same thing with my daughter. They want to be at church. And I will just say that has not always been the case. And so as a dad, what do you think that does for me as an employee? To know that my kids are loved, it changes my feelings about the church. It makes me want to work harder. It makes me care. I mean, you treat my kids right. If you do nothing else but treat my kids right, that matters more to me than about anything. And so anyway, so these are some things that the conference paid for. And then the things that we mentioned were what the church paid for.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you, Ken. We're coming to the end of our time together. So I've got one more question that I have to ask you, but maybe there might be another one coming. I see Zach, you look like you're ready to ask a question as well.
Yeah, and it might be the same one, but we started out talking about this podcast, just the timing of it. When we talk about pastoral succession, we can't escape the fact that we're interviewing people who have done succession plans during COVID and during the COVID era. And so I would just love to hear from you what that was like. Did you have to deal with some of the politics of church politics regarding masks, vaccines, those kinds of things, or were you did you have to jump into anything like that as you came in?
Yeah, I think anytime there's a new guy, the people who are dissatisfied with the way things have been are quick to grab a hold of your ear and let you know what they'd like to see. For me, it's been pretty easy here with the COVID policy. We're before we were called WholeLife Church, we were called the Florida Hospital Church. We've been very much connected with the Advent Health hospital system. Just to give you a little context, Advent Health is the second largest employer in the state of Florida. So they're a big thing. And our church has always kind of considered itself to be the hospital church, to be the church that kind of ministers to people that are in, whether they're patients or employees of the largest campus that Advent Health runs in Orlando. And so when I came, the policy was that we were following the non-clinical policy for Advent Health. So basically in their offices and things like that, whatever their policy was, that was kind of what our policy was going to be. And so there's some people who pushed back on it. And I just said, hey, a policy is a policy. I'm not changing anything for the first 6 months to a year that I'm here, because I don't, it's one of the things that, fortunately, having had enough transitions, I can just tell people sometimes when you try to fix something, that when you're new and you think that something's broken, you make it worse because you don't really understand what you're fixing. Maybe it is broken, but you may not understand what the real reason is behind why it's broken. So it really pays to sit back and learn. There's some things that are safety issues that sometimes you just have to jump in and make some changes.
Yeah.
One of the things that I did change, and I want to definitely insert this, and this was one of the things that surprised me, because the staff, when I came on, said, what do you want to do different? And I said, I want to sit back for 6 months to a year and they're like, hey, look, you don't have to wait. If you see something, you tell us, we're on board with it. And I credit Andy with that, because I think Andy said that to them. If he wants to change things, he's got to do it. So we tightened up our staff meeting. They had kind of more of rambling meetings where everybody just took a turn talking, and it would go for 3 or 4 hours. I made it where we have an agenda.
Did you say 3 or 4 hours? Really?
Yeah.
3 or 4 hours?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've tightened up to, we're about 2 hours. We have an hour of what I'd say staff training, where we go through books. We talk about non-business items, more of just development type of things. And then we have an hour of business that we do. And if you want to talk about business, you got to put it on the agenda ahead of time. And so anyway, so that was one thing that we tightened up, and it actually increased staff satisfaction a lot. There were people that dreaded, we all dread going to a 3 or 4 hour meeting. And so that was one thing. And then the other thing that I did, there was a mega church down the road from me in Nashville that they closed their offices on Mondays. And so when I came in here, one of the things that I realized is I tend to wear myself out. I'm a workaholic. I like to work. I enjoy what I do. So it's not work. It's fun. I get to go play with my friends and have fun. You can't beat that. And so, but one of the things I've also realized is I had a mentor that told me, Ken, he said, you chop more wood if you stop and sharpen your axe. And so what I did is when I came in here, I wasn't originally going to do it, but I told him, I said, one of the things I'd really like to do is close our office on Mondays, and everybody takes Monday off. It's just, it's everybody's off. Nobody contacts each other unless it's to have fun and play, but not work. And we've done that. And that's been a huge thing. I had several staff members that it's the first time in my career where I've actually had a Sabbath, where I've actually had a day off. And that was a huge thing that I was really happy that we made that transition and did that. And I was really relieved that the staff were okay with getting on board with that. And I've forgotten what the rest of the question was that I was originally asked.
No, it was great. And just a quick little tag question to that. A lot of the research that we've done points to incoming pastors and succession plans facing a lot of discouragement early on. So whether it's from the congregation not receiving them well, or maybe the senior pastor not setting up the succession well. It sounds like both of those things were not an issue for you. But then that third factor that's coming is COVID. And so guessing as the senior pastor of the previous site, maybe you face some discouragement, probably like every pastor in America. Did you find that some of that carried over into your new role in WholeLife, or have you faced any discouragement surrounding COVID as you jumped in?
I really haven't. And I came from a church where I almost felt like I almost needed to leave Madison campus because of some of the stress of COVID. That, if you were open, there were the people who told you you're killing people. If you closed, you had no faith, and whatever. And at Madison campus, we took we're going to close down. We were a big church, and we did most of what we did online. We did some outdoor church stuff, but there's that 50% of your congregation that just sure that I don't know. And so coming in here, I just haven't. It's been good. The whole transition, my Madison campus transition was hard. It was rough. It was all the things that you described. It was discouraging. It was all those things. This has been, honestly, I keep being afraid. I just feel a little flinchy, just like, when's the shoe going to drop? Because it's just been so good so far. And, a year into it, if things get hard, and I'm sure they will, man, I've been blessed with a year. I've never had a transition like this. It was phenomenal. And that was one of the other cool things that the church did, is before I arrived, they did a series of videos where they interviewed friends and family of mine. They called it "Who Are You?" And they showed these 2-minute clips of people describing who Ken is to the church. And so it felt like there were that ready automatic, transition. People already kind of beginning to know who I am. They met my parents, they met my brother, they met my family and some of my closest friends, and heard who I was and what I was about. And it just, that was a really positive thing too. So yeah, the transition for me, I feel sorry. I've been through nasty transitions and hard ones, but this is, like I said, it's been wonderful. And I give Andy credit, I give the board credit, and I'll give our conference some credit too for allowing it to play out the way that it did. But I think, to me, the most credit goes to Andy. Andy could have made this, he could have made it rough. I mean, he could have made it really rough. But he had the foresight to, it wasn't cheap. The consulting group, I'm understanding, I think it was over $40,000 to do that search, which is a lot of money within the Seventh-day Adventist Church to be thinking about doing that. But you know what? Sometimes in life you get what you pay for.
Listen, Ken, you've given us so much good information. I'm going to pitch one last question, and you can just swat it away if you don't want to answer it. But you started going down the road when you told us about this 2-minute video series that they did of, who's Ken, so people could get some idea of who you are. If you could just dream in your wildest imagination, what are some innovations that you think churches could have if there was no limit in budget, if it was a perfect world? Are there any innovative ways that you think successions could be made even better?
Yeah, I would just say, look at WholeLife and use that blueprint. That would be what I would. It really, like,
not biased. Yeah,
I don't know. I am a little bit biased, but I feel like I can be biased because I had nothing to do with it aside from being the guy they picked.
Right.
I don't take any credit for any of it. It was, they had a great plan. They found the right person for who they were. I think that within my tribe, I think that they really ought to, the model that we have has its pluses and minuses, but the difficulty is in Florida, I think we have over 200 churches, and it's very difficult for 3 or 4 people to fill pastoral churches with, and to really know the culture and who they are and what they really need. And so and that's not to say that they don't. It's just in my estimation, this just worked really well. And the conference wasn't cut out of it. The vice president for ministerial was a part of the search committee. They had veto power if they wanted it. But I remember that the chair who's in charge of of it told me that he reached out to the VP for ministerial and told him, hey, I want to work hand in glove with you. I do not want there to be daylight between us. If you don't like something, you need to tell me. And there was one point where they were concerned about some of the decisions or where things were headed. And the VP told the chair, and the chair adjusted and said, hey, we're not going to, if you're concerned, we're concerned. And made the pivot, but they also encouraged the VP to kind of let the process run and trust that the process really would bring in, because the VP was concerned about some of the people on the list. And the person said, just trust us to make the right decision. And if the VP, I trust the VP. And what he told me was he was thrilled when I was picked. That he was like, man, he didn't push any which way for any of the candidates because he wanted to stay neutral, but he said he was thrilled. He was really happy with the decision they made. And I think it comes down to trusting a process. And a lot of times I think we don't trust a process. And I that was a takeaway for me. We're filling a children's ministry pastor position. We just got done interviewing 3 people for it. None of them were right. And we need a children's ministry pastor right now. And one of them was good. We could have made it work. But I knew they weren't right. So we scrapped all 3. We said, I'm sorry, it's just not the right fit, any of these 3. And now I've got 3 new candidates on the table that 2 of them are fantastic. I know either one of those will fit what we need perfectly. But I think sometimes we get so rushed to fill a position that we forget that there's a right person for the position. And I'm a person that believes God brings people in, that God's in charge, God has a plan, and we just need to tap in and let him lead. But I think sometimes we get so busy trying to be smart or we get desperate. And the one thing I've learned is getting the wrong person or even the not right person into the job is way worse than waiting for 6 months or waiting for 9 months or waiting for a year to get the right person into the job, the person that's called, that identifies with that church. And so I think my advice to any church would be to hurry up and slow down when it comes to succession planning. Just plan on it taking a little bit of time. Most churches can figure out a way to cover a pulpit. They can figure out a way to cover governance for a little while. And it's just worth the wait. It goes back again to giving that pastor some time to transition in. Don't hurry them into the pulpit. You'd rather have a well-rested pastor, one that's excited and feels like ready to go, than one that's just coming out of moving, all the emotions of leaving a church behind. And the other thing that I think that we forget about is that a church needs some time to mourn. WholeLife needed some time to mourn Andy leaving. Me showing up the next week or 2 weeks, that would have been, it's like somebody, it's like having parents and one of them dies and your parents married 2 weeks later. You're like, what? You need some time to mourn. You need some time to allow them to be like, hey, dad's gone. And then you're looking forward to the next person. And when after a month or 2 or 3 or 4, you're like, yeah, we're ready to have somebody. Let's go. So anyway.
Ken, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to bring this to an end, but you have given us so much wisdom. You have shared lessons that have corroborated some of our literature review and also given us new places in which we can learn from. So we want to thank you again for joining us from Florida on this sunny Memorial Day, and for sharing it with Zach on his 17th anniversary.
So only 7, but
7. Oh, I had 17.
But yeah, I mean, I didn't get married at 16 years old. So yeah, but 7th anniversary. But Ken, I'll plan on zooming you in for my 17th also. So
Yeah.
we'll see you in 10 years.
But we could just do this every year, Zach. Every year
Yeah,
you and I can get
every
together for a
anniversary.
podcast on your anniversary. I'm sure your wife will look forward to that. It'll be very
She will look
meaningful for
forward
her.
to it every
Hey, listen,
year.
thank you guys.
You won't get past 7, so let's go ahead and not do that.